we are going to jump right in as we have a lot to cover in 22 minutes. We actually ran a little long the first time. So first of all, using GoToWebinar, we suggest that you view in full screen mode, which is the button here. Also, if you have any questions during the presentation, please answer them in the question field, and we'll be answering as many as we can as soon as the 22 minutes is over. Also, we will be having interactive poll questions which show up on your screen. These are multiple choice, selectable questions, answers that you can select from, and we'll be showing the results for those. All right, we're actually going to jump right in and show a poll question after we go over these 4 main objectives. We're going to show you some ideation and brainstorming tools, and we'll have a quick demonstration of SOLIDWORKS Mechanical Conceptual. Then we're going to take the idea from Mechanical Conceptual and bring it into SOLIDWORKS and take it from the original concept all the way down through manufacturing. All right, and now we're going to start with that first poll question that I mentioned. So quickly, does your company have a formal conceptual design process in place? Yes, and you rarely use it, or yes, and we use it often, or no. And select on screen there, and I'll give everybody a chance to vote. I'll leave the poll open for a few more questions, and I'll be showing the results. And while I leave that open, I want to go ahead and introduce our presenters today. First of all, Paul Fatala is a product marketing manager for SOLIDWORKS. He has over 5 years experience in product design and blue sky mechanical concept development, and has taught product design for 2 years and also holds 3 patents, has a master's degree in mechanical engineering from MIT. And then Mark Schneider is going to be handling the second part of the presentation in SOLIDWORKS. Mark has been with SOLIDWORKS for over 17 years now, so you may be familiar with his a lot of his videos that he does. And he was involved in the industry, in our industry, longer than that. If you've been to SOLIDWORKS World, you may know Mark is the guy who runs the Model Media content. So with that, Paul, let me close this poll, and let me share the results real quick. So 67% do not have a conceptual design process, so this is good. All right, so let me close the poll, and Paul, it's all you.
Thank you, Cliff. So let's just dive right in. When trying to come up with new ideas and the whole brainstorming aspect of it, coming up with concepts, it's most important to first define the problem. If you can't really solve a problem if you don't define it well. So, I mean, let's say in the example of this little drawing here, we have a leaky bucket. Well, is the leaky bucket the problem, or is it the walk that you have to go from the water source to where you want to take the water the real problem? So, stay more problem focused during this part of the conceptual design process versus solution focused, as different problems have different solutions. So when you define the problem, explore existing solutions. Now, if you're in the intellectual property space, maybe this will require a prior art search or something like that. But see what other people have done and see what's lacking in their designs. You know, if you find that eventually found a solution that works, if nothing's missing, don't design anything. Don't waste your money. Don't waste your time. You know, you can also look to other industries. I'll show you exactly what the concept we'll be designing today. But look at other industries and see what they're trying to do to help create the product that you're looking to create, but that they're lacking in a certain way, and that's really where the design comes in. And of course, inspire ideas by combining your ideas of what you think would make the best product with what some of the other people have been doing. So we have a scenario here. We have this little need for a folding table that's about mid-range cost, so not too expensive, not too cheap. Clamp top so you can clamp some work and and basically have a portable workstation that can also support 300 pounds. And then you want to come up with some ideas. As I said before, you want to look to other industries. See who else is trying to do something where they're trying to create a portable work surface or just a work surface overall. You want to come up with quick concept sketches. Now, as you can see below, these are not by any means pretty or beautiful sketches. They're just a way to indicate what you're trying to achieve. Initially, work independently. Think of as many ideas as you can. Get inspiration from anywhere you can, and then build off each other's ideas. Now, when it comes to brainstorming, you sometimes just want to go nuts. You just want to let the mind think of any possible thing it can. On the very right, this is not really that crazy, but in a very docile form of the word nuts, this is just some sort of magneto-levitation. I don't know. It's just a concept, and that's really what you want your brain to do, just to come up with the concepts, so that you don't have to judge anything in the beginning part. Now is when you want to start judging your ideas. You want to define your needs. What does your solution really need to accomplish? So in our case, we want to make sure it's clamping, it's foldable, it's low cost, and it's sturdy. So what we did is, because sturdy is the most important thing, we actually biased our weighting scheme so that we could actually figure out what's most important to us. If we had a concept that was able to clamp something and foldable and low cost, but it can only hold up like 2 pounds or whatever it is, that's not going to cut it. So having this, the weighting here helps us determine selection bias. So we selected this concept here, and then you want to sort of prove out the key technology. In this case here, we have a 4-bar mechanism that we want to make sure can actually fold properly. So in the general sense of the brainstorming, ideation, concept creation side, you want to do some concept modeling. You want to, I think Thomas Edison said something about to come up with a good concept. All you need is some ideas and a pile of garbage, just to sort of hack things together and see if you can make some sort of kludgy representation of what you're looking to achieve. This is not the time to sort of set up tooling. This is the time to see, can you find the cheapest way to prove out a concept that you have. There are more sophisticated tools that really help in terms of mechanical conceptual design, and that's where I'm going to start to show you SolidWorks Mechanical Conceptual and how it can help you with mechanical conceptual design. So here we have our basic linkage setup here, and as you can see, it has too many degrees of freedom. So the way that we're going to actually help that is by locking down another linkage here, so that we go from 2 degrees of freedom just to 1. So with this linkage here, we're just going to come up with just a dimension, just to throw it down, so we just get an idea of the overall lengths that we're working with in position. And then what we're going to do is we're actually going to actuate it to see how it folds. So we can see it folds somewhat nicely. We think we can do a little bit better. So let's see if we can just maybe play with this dimension here and see exactly how it'll affect the end result. So just moving the table back up, we can see that, okay, it's working somewhat, but it's not exactly what we want. So maybe we can just let this dimension be driven and see if we can maybe just sort of squeeze it into place, just sort of get it exactly where it needs to be. So we get it nestled up pretty tight. So now we're starting to cook with gas here. So now we see that, okay, there's about 450 millimeters. Let's just lock it down. Great. So it's looking good. Now at this point, what we want to do is we just want to see, all right, will it now work exactly the way we want to? And it does. Lock it up. All right, so it's working. Good. We like it. So now we really want to sort of focus on that part. As you can see, there's a part here you can see I'm zooming in here, on the left here, where it's sticking out like a sore thumb. We don't like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to just fix down the table a little bit so that nothing moves anywhere. We're going to make those things unrigid. So in mechanical conceptual, you're able to make your linkages rigid or unrigid. So now we remove the rigid constraint so that we can sort of move them to the place that we want. And then all we got to do is just throw a quick dimension on there. Either you can throw a dimension to find its length, or you can go back to the other linkage that we'll do here, and you're just going to make it rigid. So you're just saying, hey, stay the dimension that you are. I want to see how you're going to work. So now we got to, oh, I forgot to unlock the fixed constraint. No big deal. Everyone makes mistakes. So bringing it back up to the top, we see that it works perfectly. So, I should probably grab it from the other point. Sorry about that. So bringing it back down here, we can see that, look, it actuates perfectly. You can, do this a few times, and 1, and 2, and looks great. So now we're trying to now transfer these key characteristics, these dimensions that we have. We want to transfer this over to Mark. So we're just going to throw down some dimensions so Mark can take this and just maybe bring it into SolidWorks so that he can start doing some of the detailed design. And the key here with SolidWorks Mechanical Conceptual is really that you're able to, get an understanding of how things should be laid out. It's not about having a final, perfect solution that is like detailed and everything. That's what SolidWorks is for. SolidWorks Mechanical Conceptual is for the upfront conceptual design that we found 30% of people are spending their time in conceptual design, so we feel like it's best to give you the best tools to help you during that stage of the design process. So now we're going to take this, I'm going to send you over to Mark, who's going to take over with the more detailed aspects of design.
Hey, thanks, Paul. Before we do that, one more poll question for you. How do you prepare your designs for manufacturing? Is it just more of a best guess and trial and error, or do you use simulation or validation software, or you collaborate with your team and come up with the best solution? So Only a few percent have voted, so give everybody a chance to participate. And then we'll hand it over to Mark to take that concept through manufacturing using SolidWorks. So let's close this and show the results. And 56%, over half of you, collaborate with your team, and that's the way to do it. So, all right, let me hand over to Mark. Mark, are you already presenter?
I believe I am.
Okay, good. Let me close the poll then.
Yep, close that poll and I'll be able to share my screen.
There you go.
Great. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Beautiful. Well, thanks, Cliff. Thanks, Paul. So what we're going to do is we're going to take Paul's concept and turn it into a product and actually get it ready for manufacturing. So one of the things we want to be able to do is leverage those hand sketches. Now, Paul could have continued on with this design and actually built geometry, started building solid geometry, and I could have imported that. I was too impatient. I just took a screen capture, and I'll show you how I was able to leverage that hand sketch. One of the other things we did is how do we know what size legs and linkages, how big do each of these parts need to be? So we did some simulation up front for initial part sizing. We also went through some interference and clearance to make sure, and I like to think of design as a very iterative, evolving process. So you go through, you add some features, add things to make the product function and meet the proper form. But one of the key characteristics of doing that is to be able to do interference detection. Leverage other people's models. In this case, we had to import some handles that we were purchasing, and we also imported things like this little bronze bushing. I'll show you how we went through that. Like I said, let your designs evolve. So a lot of this linkage that Paul didn't take into account in his design needed to be done in a detailed design. So you really got to start getting down and make sure things can be manufactured and make sure that things go together and you don't have any interferences. So this is our table. This is what we actually came up with. So let's jump into SolidWorks here and kind of give you an understanding of where we started and how we got there. So I'm going to start at a very early design stage, if you will. So as I mentioned before, I took a image of what Paul did. So if we look at that from the back, you can see that's an image, and I just brought that into SolidWorks and started sketching over the top of it. Well, one of the key things about doing this is being able to get that image into SolidWorks and getting it at the proper scale. And that's in the past, and some tools, it's been a challenge. I'm just going to start a new part right here, and we'll jump in and create a brand new sketch and just walk you through the process of how I went through that. We have the opportunity to bring in a sketch picture, so I'm just going to bring this in, zoom to fit there, and you'll see this little blue line here. This blue line is a sizing tool. It allows me to enable the scale of my sketch. So I'm going to position there. I know that needs to be 500 center to center. And we'll drop that right on the center of that and key in 500, and that scales my sketch to be at the proper size. So that gives me a good starting point. So that's really how I approached creating that first design. I'm not going to save this. We'll just throw that one away. I already have that portion of it done. So we'll hide this guy here, and that's how we sized each of the lengths of each of these legs. Obviously, the key critical dimensions that Paul gave me, I was able to leverage and key those values in directly, but I needed to get started somewhere. So the next thing we did is we tried to figure out, okay, what size tubing do we need? We're going to use tubing for the legs, little C channel up here. What size material do I need to use? How thick do these linkages need to be? And obviously we have a pretty simple design at this point. So what we did is we leveraged SolidWorks simulation, added some loads at the top, added some boundary conditions at the bottom, and then we ran our simulation. So in this case here, you can see I have a list of stresses, but I have different materials. So different materials have different yield strengths, and trying to figure out which material is which, it can be difficult. So I use the factor of safety plot for that, because what that does is it compares the actual stress in that part against that part's yield stress. So it's a much better read for what I'm looking for. So if I zoom in here, I can use the probe tool and just start clicking around and seeing that, okay, factor of safety is 10. Right now I have 20 by 20, 1 millimeter wall, so I really don't want to go any smaller than that. That's even though my factor of safety is kind of high, and plus our design is going to flesh out a little bit, so things may change. Everything looks good up here. A little bit of maybe high stresses in this area here around this pin, and that's something we might need to be concerned about. But it's just one of those things that allows us to get our sizes. Initially, when I went through this, I didn't know how thick these are. These are 1.5 millimeters thick, and that was one of those things I had to go through some early on initial sizing using the SolidWorks simulation. Displacement, you can see that if we look at our displacement plot, we can animate this and get a nice general understanding of how it's going to behave, make sure it behaves as we expect, and sure it does. We only have about 1 millimeter, just under 1 millimeter, so we're not worried about that deflection. That's not going to be any problem. Obviously, our stresses and so on and so forth. If we look at this orange area, that's 0.5 millimeter is what that's deflecting under a 300-pound total load. Finally, we wanted to size our bolts. So how do we know what size bolts? I could have gone through the process of adding a whole bunch of bolts and changing the sizes and see which one works best. What I did is I actually used the pin connections inside of SolidWorks simulation. So what that allows me to do is just define, without having to define geometry, just define where that pin location is, and then I can define strength data for that particular area and a tensile stress area. So I toyed with those. I ended up coming up with something that was a 5 millimeter screw. I really didn't want to go any lower than a 5 millimeter screw, and you can see that all of my pins are, okay. They're in the okay column. None of them need attention up here, which is, good information. Now we need to know that. We need to know that stuff for sizing our geometry. So the next thing we did is went through some motion studies, just as Paul did. So we take this guy, run it through its motion. Everything looks like it's performing just the way Paul had done and given us the appropriate dimensions there. Well, that's fine. But one of the things you want to be able to do is you want to be able to check and make sure that as it runs through its motion, there are no interferences or collisions or anything. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that and turn on collision detection here and just drag this part around in the design. It looks pretty good. I get to this point, and it starts lighting up and saying, hey, you got some interferences here. So if I grab this guy, this face is lighting up. Well, if I come and look on the back, you can see the two faces that are interfering are lighting up, and it's showing me right there I have a problem. So part of my iterative process is, hey, I need to make some changes here. So let's just come in here and we'll change the location for that offset there. We'll make this 150. And that's just a sheet metal jog that I added to that part so that it can have a little bit of an offset. And this was part of my iterations going through, hey, I can't get these two to line up. I'll add a little jog in there. Well, let's see how we behave now. We'll go back to our interference detection, our collision detection here, and just grab this part, kind of move it around. Okay, now I'm getting a different interference down here. It looks like something with the edge of this tube. Sure enough, the edge of the tube and the back side of that rivet are interfering. So, again, more design iterations, more changes I have to make to get my design fleshed out completely. Now, since we only have 22 minutes to kind of run through this whole thing, I'm not going to walk you through the entire process. I'm just going to jump over to, back to SolidWorks, jump over to our finished design here and kind of give you a general understanding of where we evolved and what how we evolved and got to where we were. So if you take a look at our linkage down here now, we had to add some sheet metal features for the little form tools here to allow us to interlock and kind of give us a snap that to an open position so it doesn't just pop open by itself. We don't want that to happen. And this also allows me to lock it a little bit over top dead center there. Allows me to interlock those together and keeps it nice and smooth. So using all those techniques, of sizing my components and using collision detection, so on and so forth, this is the design we came up with. So you can see you got some extra offsets and stuff in there. We put some offsets back here so we don't scratch the paint on the side of it. I'm going to kind of fold this guy up here just to give you an understanding why we have so many crazy offsets in there. And you can see that as we fold together, I got to miss that little button right there. This has got to be away from the side of the tube and can't hit the screw head, so on and so forth. So you can see all the different things that we had to do to go through and come up with the right design for this particular work table. So the next thing we want to do is talk a little bit about design reuse. I'm going to kind of just dig into this guy here. This is also part of the design. It's going to kind of cut a cross section of that little subassembly at the top here for our crank. And I'll make this this guy here. Let's just make that flexible so we can move it around in our assembly here. So as we come in here, you can see I can grab my crank, kind of run it through its motion. You can see how everything starts to work and how it starts to behave. Everything looks, looks great. But one of the things you'll notice is that there are some little bronze bushings. Since this thing needs to spin around, there's some heavy loads, both thrust and vertically on this. We had to, find some thrust bearings to put in there, little bronze bushings there, if you will. So the way we did that is, went to my friendly supplier and was able to download those models. And how do we bring those in? Simple as just opening up an IGES file. So this is just an IGES file here. We can bring in all kinds of types of geometry that can be imported into SolidWorks. And that's how we got items like that in there. Very quick and easy. You go to Content Central, 3D Content Central, download models, be able to reuse them. No sense in reinventing the wheel there. I've already brought that part in, placed it into my design, so we'll go on with that. And then it's just a matter from there of running through all the design iterations to make sure that the thing works, the thing, goes, is not going to break, it functions, it doesn't have any interferences, doesn't have any clearances, so on and so forth. And this is what we came up with. This is our idea for our design. So let's jump back to our design. These are the things we just covered, letting our design evolve, and we came up with this. So those are kind of what I think of the inputs of things that need to be put into your design to get it to, a particular location. So downstream, you need to be able to create drawings. There's still a lot of shops that are only making things from drawings. You need to be able to document that, especially for inspection purposes and so on. We also need to make sure that the simulation that we ran earlier is still valid, and you can see that we reran the simulation on the final model, make sure that we were still valid. How much is this thing going to cost? Is this thing going to be cost efficient to manufacture? Is it going to cost $2,000 to make, and therefore we're not going to be able to, to sell many of them, right? It's got to add value. And then we'll also talk a little bit about design for manufacturability. When this thing goes to the shop, I'm sure there's plenty of people on this webinar that have had someone from the shop come drag them out on the floor and say, how do you expect me to cut this part? You didn't do it right. You didn't add the dimensions. You put this hole too close to the edge. This hole is too deep, so on and so forth. Design for Manufacturability Express does that for us. So that's a cool little tool. So then we'll show you drawing, simulation, and costing and DFM Express. So let's jump back over to SolidWorks here real quick. So first thing we want to do is we'll talk about drawings. So I'm just going to jump to a finished drawing of this assembly. So obviously assembly drawings are very important. We got to be able to create assembly drawings. SolidWorks is great at doing that. We have our views with all the appropriate annotations that give us overall dimensions. We even have a folded view on here of how it looks in the folded position. Not only that, but bill of material information, all of our balloons to identify that, and then we have costing information, which we'll talk about shortly, and then kind of a rolled up cost here at the bottom as well to give us a general understanding what it's going to cost us. So how do we create these drawings? If you haven't seen it before, or you haven't done this before, I'll show you just how easy it is. Fairly simple part here, but you'll see in about 30 seconds here I'll be able to create a part drawing of this particular item right here. We'll throw an isometric on there if we like. That looks good. I don't need any center lines for that guy. Maybe we'll make this view shaded. That always looks nice on our drawings. Maybe even this view we'll change the scale. Let's make that 1:3. Looks a little bit better right there. Now we need to get our dimensions. Well, we used dimensions when we created these, these features here. So let's just leverage those dimensions and recreate those dimensions right on our drawing. So I'm able to leverage information that we previously used, get all my dimensions on my drawing for whatever I need to do. So that's just how easy it is to create drawings with SolidWorks. Let's go back to our assembly and talk about simulation. So we had obviously run a simulation earlier, but our design has changed. It's evolved. Is it still valid? Well, let's go ahead and we'll just do 1/2 of it again for the sake of expedience here, and just rerun our simulation on some of our new geometry that we have here. So we'll come down here and take a look at our simulation. We've already run this here. And you can see, again, we have stress information. Notice that we have a little bit more stress in some of these links here now. So that's kind of one of the benefits and value of being able to run this afterwards. How do we know if those are above the allowable limit for this material, including our factor of safety? We'll use the factor of safety plot. And in this area here, again, we can use the probe tool and kind of probe here and say that's got 12 factor of safety. We're pretty good. Maybe over here is something we might need to be concerned about. That's 4.35 as a factor of safety for that one. Again, we're looking for a factor of safety at 2 based on maximum loading, and everything looks pretty good there. So we're good with our factor of safety. Finally, or not finally, we'll take a look at displacement as well. Notice the red color. This is about 1.54 millimeters. What, maybe 50 thousandths of an inch or something like that. You know, not like it's a whole lot, but you'll notice that the color corresponding to the deflection down here is less. So we have more deflection here than we have in that area there. Just animate that to give you kind of an understanding. You can see how that moves. One of the things we didn't really account for when we went through our design is that because of the load path between the two legs, and this being offset out here about 4 or 5, probably about 6 millimeters, that actually tends to pull that back in. We only have about 50 thousandths of an inch. It's not a stress problem. It's not a deflection problem. It's not anything to worry about. It's something that we really wouldn't have come across had we not run our simulation again. And again, it turns out that it's not an issue, not a problem. But, you know, it's something we needed to be aware of. Finally, we'll take a look at our pin, do our bolt check again. And again, all 9 of our bolts are okay. You can click on those and see that, yeah, you know, plenty of factor safety in my bolts. Someone asked me on the earlier presentation, you know, can I get information about those pins? Well, here's your each of the pins, the bending moment, torque, shear, axial force, so on and so forth for each and the resultants. So yeah, we have that information. It's very valuable and very useful when you're trying to size your pins. You get a kind of, the green means go, no go. It's basically green and red for your pins and bolts there. So the next thing we want to take a look at is costing. How much is this thing going to cost? So let's blast into this here real quick. I'm just going to open up this part right here. We'll take a look at this version here that's obviously got a couple of jogs in it. It's got these form features that we've added. You know, something that, you know, all those things cost money. It costs extra money than just having a flat bar. So how do we know what those things cost? Well, we'll use Solidworks Costing to do that. So just run a costing analysis. What this does is it takes into account the material we're using, the cost for the material that we're using. It also takes into account the number of parts that we're creating and the lot size. You know, that's always important, especially for setup costs and stuff like that. Come up with a cost of about $3.64. Where does it come up with these numbers? Well, it all gets added together and divided by the number of parts, obviously. But you'll notice that, like this laser that cuts the outer cut path around here in each of these holes, you know, it's calculating how much linear distance it has to travel. But this laser says it has 0 cost. Actually, if you look at the tooltip, it says 0.001, which is $20 cost for setup divided by our lot size, which is quite large in this case here. So it still gets added in there, but the setup cost would be a bigger portion of the manufacturing cost had I not divided it over a larger lot size. So we looked at the cut paths here. Each of these cut paths gets identified, and we get a cost per millimeter of travel for that one. Each of the bends, you know, all those bends get accounted for, and we have a cost to create each of those. We also have costs associated with applying these form features as well. So it's a kind of a really good tool for allowing you to come up with that cost information quickly and easily. Next thing we did was run through some design for manufacturability. First thing we're going to look at is we're allowed to choose which is our manufacturing process. Obviously, this one's for sheet metal. Right now, I didn't change my recommended bend radius. We'll set that to 2, and then run our design for a DFM Express solver here, and it'll actually go through and actually calculate and tell me, hey, what are my problem areas? So if you look at some of these rules here, hole to diameter thicknesses, you don't want to be drilling holes too deep. You break drill bits and so on and so forth. Simple hole, the distance to an edge of a part. You don't want to drill holes too close to a part. Countersunk hole distance, simple hole spacing. All these things are checks that SolidWorks does, DFM Express does when it goes off and interrogates the model, the geometry of the model, and make sure that none of these are violated. In this case here, I actually have 2 rules that failed. Let's come in here and take a little bit closer look. Well, it's telling me that this recommended bend radius is 1.5 when it should be 2. And that's okay. This is actually a form feature. It's not necessarily a bend. It's a form feature. So we're going to be okay and let that one go and just let that one pass. So that one's not going to be much of a problem for us. Let's go back to this guy here. Oh, I don't want to do that. So, you know, really quickly, we were able to run through and kind of, you know, discuss, you know, creation of drawings, and so the drawings already created, our simulation, costing, and design for manufacturability. So those are some of the downstream capabilities of SOLIDWORks. So to kind of wrap up this quick little 20-minute demo, and I know we've gone over, but you know, we had our inputs, you know, the stuff I got from Paul, you know, our upfront simulation, our collision detection, importing of parts, that we used all that information to iterate and design a new product. And then the outputs for that, the downstream outputs, able to create our drawings, get costing information, and make sure that the shop's not going to come screaming at us, they can't manufacture this thing. So hopefully that was a useful little demonstration to show a lot of SOLIDWORks tools that are available for taking your designs from concept to manufacture.